Time-lapse photography is like making pizza. There's a million ways to make them, but some are just made better with better ingredients. And the main ingredient I want to talk about today is pepperoni. I mean, an interval. Because with the right interval, your time-lapse will be as delicious and visually appealing as a perfect cold oven pizza. So how do you choose the best time-lapse interval for your scene? Well, that's what this video is all about, so buckle up and let's learn to warp time like Doctor Strange. A couple things to help us first. What is a time-lapse interval? An interval is the amount of time that takes place between the beginning of each of our photos. So imagine this, you're starving and you're waiting for pizza delivery. Of course, you keep checking your phone to see if your pizza's arrived. The time that you wait between each time that you check your phone is an interval, which can feel like forever depending on how hungry you are. Well, in time-lapse photography, the interval is the time between each photo, and it has a huge impact on how your video turns out. If a short interval is like a hungry person checking the phone every second, you're gonna have more details on where the pizza is, but it can feel painfully slow. It's kind of like watching paint dry or waiting for your pizza. Whereas a longer interval is like a laid back stoic checking their phone every few minutes. I feel like the pizza arrived sooner to the person waiting, even though it took the same amount of time. The second frequently asked question is, what is an interval versus shutter speed? If an interval is the amount of time between each photo, the shutter speed is the amount of time it takes for the camera to take the photo. For example, if we have an interval of 2 seconds and a 1 second exposure, every 2 seconds, the camera will fire a photo and it'll take a 1 second long exposure. There's 3 really important things to know about. First, our interval is separate than our shutter speed, and it will not wait until the photo is done taking to begin counting. Second, a good rule of thumb to aim for is the habit of getting our shutter speed to be half of our interval. This will give us motion blur, and if you can't quite get it to half, do your best and maybe save up for an ND filter. These act like sunglasses and cut out the light to allow you to take longer exposures. So if we're doing a holy grail, specifically a sunset time-lapse, as it gets darker, the exposure is actually going to increase over time. And this could really easily interfere with our interval, especially if we have a short interval. If you're sitting there thinking, whoa, there's a lot to think about, my head's spinning, don't worry, I have a whole video that's meant to be the easiest possible way to shoot a holy grail time-lapse. Hint, it's aperture priority mode, and then there's a few extra settings that I talk about. So now, how to choose a time-lapse interval. So how to choose an interval is like asking what pizza should you get. It totally depends on where you're ordering it from, who you're ordering it for, if there's vegetarian or somebody who likes pineapples on their pizza, and how hungry you are. Each situation is just different, because if you choose an interval that's too fast on something that isn't moving, people are gonna feel like they're watching paint dry. The problem is, if you choose an interval that's too slow, like 30 seconds, 15 minutes, a day, things might move too fast and the audience isn't even sure of what they were looking at. And that's why I'm gonna give you some of the most common subjects you'll find so you can make your own decisions on the time-lapses you shoot. Time-lapse interval for clouds. Just like pizza toppings, clouds are different. So for the sake of this, we're gonna cover 3 types of cloud formations. Let's start with those cirrus clouds. They're high in the sky and they move fast. And because they move fast, we want a shorter interval, like 3 to 5 seconds. If cirrus clouds were cheese melting on pizza, they'd be the mozzarella of clouds. Next are the Simpsons clouds or cumulus clouds. These ones are puffy, lower, generally move slower, like they're stuck in the sky. Because they move slower, we want a bigger interval, like 10 to 15 seconds. These are the burrata cheese of clouds. Next is gonna be storm clouds. These are gonna be like our frozen microwave pizzas. Storm clouds come in all shapes and forms, but the main thing to know is that they happen fast. I recommend using an interval of 1 to 3 seconds. Time-lapse intervals for sunrises and sunsets. I'm talking specifically about the process of seeing the entire sunset or sunrise. For these, we want to be there equal times before and after. This way we have a full spectrum of the colors and all the change. So I recommend starting with an hour before and an hour after the sunset because you'll get the most dramatic change. So this means you'll be shooting for at least 2 hours. And if there's no clouds in the sky, you can do 15 to 20 second interval. But if there are clouds, that might make it a little bit more interesting. So I would recommend a 10-second interval. Time-lapse interval for capturing the color of a sunrise or sunset. So if you're specifically after the colors of a sunrise or a sunset, this change is only dramatic for like 15 to 20 minutes on a really vivid sunset. So you're gonna want a much faster interval of about 1 to 3 seconds. You may want to stay after the sunsets as well, because then you're in blue hour, which can still produce some of the most beautiful and vivid colors, even if it's just blue. Next, we got time-lapse interval of traffic. Traffic is pretty frenetic, so I recommend using a fast interval, like 1 to 2 seconds. And my favorite time to shoot traffic is at blue hour. But if I'm specifically shooting people, I'll do between 1 to 2 seconds. Time-lapse interval for the sun or moon on a telephoto lens. Depending on how big of a telephoto zoom lens you have, you're gonna want a fast interval, because if you zoom in really close to the sun or the moon, it's gonna be in and out of your frame pretty quickly. So I'd recommend anywhere between 1 to 3 seconds for that, just depending on how big your zoom lens. Event time-lapse intervals. This one's gonna vary quite a bit depending on what you wanna show. For example, if you're trying to have the whole event being built, then you're gonna wanna ask, how long will the install take? And remember that you want 10 seconds of footage and work backwards. So if they say it's gonna take 8 hours, and I want 240 photos, since there's 60 minutes in an hour, I can just multiply that by 8. 8 times 60 equals 480, meaning I want to take a photo every 2 minutes to get 240 photos. But if I'm specifically after the performance or a crowd during a single song, or I'm just looking to see the light show, I'd want a much shorter interval of like 1 to 2 seconds. All right, time-lapse intervals for stars. Since I live in Brooklyn and I rarely get to see the stars, my bias is I tend to err on the side of getting as many star photos as I can. So I shoot with a 20-second interval, but I know a lot of talented time-lapsers use 30 seconds. So go anywhere between a 20 and 30-second interval based on your preference. Long-term time-lapse interval for plants. Now, this is gonna depend on if you're trying to watch a plant grow from beginning to end, or just see a flower bloom, and how long each plant takes. You're gonna have to research the plant type and how long it takes to grow and reverse engineer it to get 10 seconds of video. But you might be looking at intervals as fast as an hour or as slow as 24 hours. Long-term time-lapse interval for buildings. This is very similar to plants. Are you trying to just see the passage of people doing one particular construction, or do you want to see the entire building? A good interval might be every hour, so you have progress stamps to show your clients to see how the project is progressing. But if you're doing a home DIY project or a construction project, you might want to reverse engineer how long it will take you to finish the project. Whatever interval is going to get you close to 240 photos. Quick recap. A time-lapse interval is the amount of time that lapses between the beginning of each photo, whereas the exposure is talking about how long the photo is being taken. In a perfect world, your exposure or shutter speed is half of your interval. You want to choose an interval based on how fast the thing in front of you is moving, how you want your viewer to feel, and how much light is changing, so your exposure doesn't ever take longer than your interval is. And like making a good pizza, this is gonna come with experimenting and time. I hope that gave you a great starting point and helps you make well-informed decisions on how to approach choosing the best time-lapse interval, as well as go out there and shoot. Remember, Thomas Edison said, genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. So now that you've watched this, go out and try it for yourself. That's the best way to learn. And treat yourself to a slice of pizza while you're at it. And this is baby Boris, and you can't hear him right now, but he is sitting there saying, please like and subscribe. If you're interested in leveling up your time-lapse and hyperlapse skills, I've got a course showing everything I've learned about it with the aim of helping you save time, improve your skills, and charge more money. If you're interested in it, click the link. It comes with a 30-day satisfaction guarantee. Please don't buy it if you can't afford it. Just do us both a favor and subscribe.